Now, in this final video, in this set of videos on the IMF in South Korea, I wanted to talk about the outcome of the IMF's assistance to South Korea and the lessons managers, international managers, can take away from this. And if we look at how South Korea's economy is doing today, right, yes, during the immediate aftermath of this crisis, with those tough IMF conditions imposed, South Korea did experience a deep recession. It was a painful, difficult time. But of course, now we see that South Korea's economy is flourishing. It's one of the great success stories. In fact, the IMF points to South Korea as one of its great successes. And so when I first went to South Korea, we had the program Thunderbird did with LG Electronics for many years. I went there twice a year for 7 years, meeting with these LG Electronics executives. And when I called actually the IMF and said, hey, maybe you have some videos or something, I can use in my class. I'm going to talk about the crisis. They were so excited, and they sent me all of this basically IMF propaganda, how wonderful the IMF was, what a wonderful thing it did in South Korea. Now, of course, I could not use any of that because when I got there and began talking about this case, literally the senior executives, as I mentioned, were very critical of the IMF. The senior executives at LG Electronics, some of them stood up and started shouting right at me and said that was a horrible thing what the IMF did in South Korea. The IMF did that only to promote the interests of the United States. Strong economic nationalist sentiment, right? Still strong in South Korea. And even though Lucky Gold Star, as it was during the crisis, it was still known as Lucky Gold Star. Now, of course, we know it as LG, that big chaebol. It was one of these family-owned business conglomerates, and it's grown to a big multinational corporation. I mean, the guys at LG Electronics, they're, making the plasma display panel TVs and the washing machines. I have an LG washing machine. I mean, this is a big multinational company. So they have succeeded. They are a great success story. But still, people remember the painful lessons of what happened, the painful experience. And so that criticism of the IMF remains years after. So what are some lessons that we can take away from this whole scenario, this whole case? Well, first of all, in general, the South Korean economy, there was a current account deficit. There was an over-reliance perhaps on portfolio capital lending. There was, but the contagion effect is really what set off this crisis. So the contagion effect and external events in general can really cause these crises. The South Korean economy might have continued for some time without that. Now, there were the underlying weaknesses of the connected lending and so on, but really the contagion effect is what caused this crisis. So that's something to be aware of, right? Another thing, and by the way, that happens in other cases. Greece has a crisis. Next thing you know, Spain is having a crisis. Portugal is having a crisis. So you see how this contagion effect can work. The other takeaway, I hope, that everyone is getting from this case is that these causes of these crises are very similar. And if you can pinpoint, right, use that, as I was calling it, tongue-in-cheek, the Nelson framework, right? Because those are common factors, people, very simple kind of things. That list, but it's a very valuable list of indicators that can help you predict a crisis. I do recommend printing out that sheet. Laminate, put it in plastic, carry it in your pocket. You can consult at any time. Oh my gosh, this country's ready to have a crisis. Because those indicators really will predict a crisis, right? So that, as an international manager, might be something useful to know. Should we export to country X? Well, wait a minute. Let's check the Nelson framework. Oh my gosh, ready to have a crisis. Maybe not a good time. Or maybe we wait until they have the crisis. There's a big currency devaluation. Then we swoop in and buy up some prized assets, right? So you might want to have a very good corporate social responsibility strategy if you're doing that, right? To kind of, there might be criticism of the company for doing that. But the point is, I'm trying to point out that these can be useful things to help you develop your strategy. And the other thing is, right, you can anticipate when the IMF provides assistance to a country, which, as we know, these conditions often create a recession. those conditions have very specific effects on that country's economy and that country's business environment. And yes, often there is a recession. There are some problems, some challenges the company might face if you're doing business in that situation. But at the same time, as we saw, there could be opportunities, right? Removing restrictions on foreign direct investment, such a typical condition, could create opportunities. So the point I was trying to make is consistent with the objectives of this course as a whole. By understanding these trends and development in the global economy and learning how to anticipate them, you can develop a more effective strategy for your company. And that's what this case was about, and that's what this course is all about.